Hello everyone, my name is Lindsay Cohen and this is my art gallery. In many ways, the human body is how we express ourselves. Our bodies express our sexuality, our race, gender, ethnicity, and is the center of how we view others. Well, the same goes for our artwork. Over thousands of years, artists have been expressing themselves through art in the form of the human body. Well, these two pictures here show how modern artists see the human body, but let's go back a few years. I've chosen 6 pieces of art that I would like to discuss with you today. The first piece is called The Lamentation of Christ. This was created in 1305 by Giotto. The style of this artwork is naturalism. It's biblical art or proto-Renaissance. It was created in the late medieval period. And the composition of this is simple. Giotto was simply telling the story of Christ. In this painting, Giotto shows more realistic people and real emotions, which was revolutionary of his time. The word laminate actually means to grieve, and that is the subject of this piece. This painting depicts the scene just after Christ had been cut down from the cross and is surrounded by grieving loved ones. The figures have individuality in their expressions and body language, and Giotto emphasizes it placed mostly on the figures. Mary is holding Christ on her lap. Her right knee is used to prop him up. Her body is draped over him, and her arms are wrapped around him. Mary has clear and evident devastation on her face. She looks as though she's pleading with Christ to wake up. The body language of the loved ones who surround Christ is similar in manner, each hunched forward towards Christ, weeping. Some have their hands up in disbelief, others have their hands clasped near their face. Mary Magdalene is placed at Christ's feet, which shows biblical tradition as she anointed his feet. The idea of representing Christ as dead is a modern idea because it allows Christ to be human rather than the spiritual idea he was thus far. Now, you might expect to see Christ in the center of the painting, but Giotto has him off to the left. He uses the landscape, the big sweeping hill in the background that's angled towards the scene to draw your eyes to the focal point. He leaves the background very simple and plain, which brings all the focus to the figures. Giotto is so interested in the naturalism of this painting that he paints 2 figures with their backs to us. They provide absolutely no information, no narrative to the painting whatsoever, but they aid in creating the illusion of space, bringing the audience into the picture. They simply frame Mary and Christ. The angels in the sky also create space as they kind of go off into heaven, the backs of them. This is an extremely emotional and moving painting. Moving on to this beautiful sculpture, this is David, and this is Donatello's interpretation of David. The exact date of creation is unknown, but it is an iconic Renaissance sculpture and is known as one of the greatest sculptures of the Quattrocento. The sculpture is credited with being the first nude sculpture since classical antiquity. Classical antiquity is also known as the classical era, which is a term used for a long period of history that was centered along the Mediterranean Sea, including ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Now, as I said, the exact creation of this is unclear, but it was first recorded as the centerpiece of the first courtyard in the Palazzo Medici during the wedding of Lorenzo de' Medici and Clarice Orsini, and that was in 1469. The subject of David was extremely important to the Florentine people as well as the Medici people because it embodied many of the concerns and ideals of this time in Florence. They felt they could identify with David, that he was not just a Bible story to them. Well, as the story goes, David defeats his enemy, Goliath, with the help of God, even though he was the underdog. Now, Florence believes they too defeated their enemy, the Duke of Milan, with God's help. David is a symbol of freedom and liberty that the Florentine people cherished greatly. He represents the promise of long leadership and youthfulness as he grows up to be a beloved king. Although this sculpture represents war, it also represents victory and peace, and that was Donatello's story behind his David. The popularity of sculpting David grew immensely from this sculpture, as you can now see many different sculptures of David in several different museums around the world. And Donatello brought back the beauty and love and respect for the human body that the Romans and Greeks once had, that was sadly lost in Western Christianity. He also refers to the Romans and Greek sculptures for the positioning of David as he's in a relaxed pose, or contrapposto. Contrapposto is an asymmetrical arrangement of the human body where the line of the arms and shoulders contrast while balancing the hips and legs. David's weight is placed mostly on one leg while the other leg is bent. He has one arm bent with his hand on his hip and his head is tilted down. David has a sensuality and eroticism to him in his body language. He wears only a hat and boots and is standing on the newly severed head of Goliath. He holds in one hand Goliath's metal sword, the sword he just used to sever his head, and in the other hand he holds a rock that he used to first bring the giant down. For the Renaissance era, this figure looks remarkably alive and fluid. This sculpture is anatomic for its time. It looks as though it could get up and move on its own. Is it possible that Donatello shows the two weapons David's holding as the opposing cities? The metal sword representing the violence of Milan versus the rock that represents the culture of Florence? The next piece I'd like to discuss is called The Elevation of the Cross. This was created by Peter Paul Rubens in 1610. The Elevation of the Cross is a beautiful, heroic, Catholic Baroque painting that hangs above an altar in a cathedral in Antwerp, Belgium. Rubens was from Spain, and he was commissioned from the church to make this painting, as the church controlled much of Europe at this time. Well, this painting, too, tells a story of the Bible. Well, the term Baroque can have many different meanings in reference to art, depending on where in the world you're from during the 1600s. And the church would often pay for artists to create art for the public, and this was one of those paintings. Rubens went and studied art in Italy for 8 years, where he studied Michelangelo. And you can see the great influence Michelangelo had over Rubens' work in this painting. Rubens depicts 9 executioners struggling and straining to lift the cross on which Christ is nailed. This painting is vivid and intense and grotesque. It's real and ugly. The men are painted with massive muscles and contortion and power, and you can see the struggle in their body language and the weight of the cross in their muscles. The realism here is in the struggle of the men and how much power it takes to actually raise the cross. Common in Baroque, the painting is split into 2 diagonal lines, giving it a sense that it is receding into space. The figures are all sort of conjoined together almost as one, as the intensity gradually increases as you move up the painting. Christ's body cuts diagonally across it, and the body of Christ is painted so beautifully. It's divine and majestic and powerful. There's even a bit of sensuality in his demeanor and in the power and the way he twists and contorts on the cross. His body has many curves and defined muscles. He's draped in only a loincloth. And he gazes up to God with this sad look, but a look of forgiveness. Lord, please forgive them, for they know not what they've done. This painting is theatrical and dramatic. The Oath of the Horatii is the next painting I'd like to talk about. This was created by Jacques-Louis David in 1785. This is a neoclassical style of art, or some would argue the birth of neoclassical art. It's depicting a scene from the revolutionary history of France. It's made only 4 years before the French Revolution. This painting is telling a complicated and controversial story about 2 neighboring cities, Roma and Alba, who were constantly at odds and decided to go to battle. So the cities agreed to settle their disagreement by picking 3 fighters from each side to go to battle, and whoever won the battle ultimately won the war. The Horatii brothers were chosen from the Roman side and the Qurashii brothers from the Alba side. You can see here in the center of the painting their fathers holding up their swords while the 3 Horatii brothers pledge their oath that they will fight to the death for their beloved Rome. The women behind them are relatives and they're mourning the upcoming battle. Interestingly, one of the sisters is married to a Qurashii brother, so she will lose regardless of the outcome of this battle. The story goes that the Horatii win the battle and Rome is victorious. When they return home, one of the brothers kills the sister due to her lack of patriotism and faithfulness to her country. What David is trying to express here is that one should be driven by virtue and love for one's country rather than personal gain. He brings the idea of self-sacrifice to this painting, which was an extremely powerful idea at this time. The aristocracy during this period in France was living a life of luxury and wealth while the rest of the country was in poverty. David's picture is simple, it's asymmetrical and linear. It's divided into 3 identical arches in the background in a Doric style order. Doric was one of the 3 orders of ancient Greek, and it's easily recognized by the simple circular capitals at the top of the columns. He also uses raking light to give sharp contrast. The people are linear as well, with a realistic perspective of the human anatomy, again showing his interest in classical antiquity. Their bodies contour and details of the body can be seen from underneath their clothing. They resemble the Greek perspective of the body. The men are hard and rigid and firm, and the women are more curved and soft. The style in which this was painted tells a story too. The picture is perfect and geometrical. That is meant to show the severity of the topic. Moving on to one of my favorite pieces of art in my gallery, this is Olympia. She was made by Edouard Manet, and she was painted in 1865. The style here is realism. Manet paints a real woman of this time in Paris. The painting brought much controversy and conversation as Manet does something radically modern and new and challenges the idea of what art was at this time. This painting was likely modeled after Titian's Venus of Urbano, although Olympia is not protected by being a goddess as Venus was. Olympia is a prostitute. At this time, it was common to see women painted nude. However, in most cases, the women were goddesses, removing the idea of sexuality. Well, Olympia is a real woman. She is painted, it's vulgar and raw, and she's not trying to hide her naked body. She lays on the couch, her body twists slightly towards the audience, and she reclines back. Her face is angular and flawed. She's not beautiful in the traditional sense. She's not perfect. She has plain features and thin lips, if you will. She wears only shoes, an orange flower in her hair, a bracelet, and a string around her neck. Her daring gaze is looking out at the viewers, which made some viewers very uncomfortable, as this was a bold thing for any woman to do, much less a woman of lower social status. Her body is hardly modeled, her boobs and abdomen and legs. She's flat looking, with the exception of her hands. They are outlined. Monet chose to outline her hands, which draws your attention to them. Some wonder if that doesn't suggest her hands are dirty or depicting the uncleanliness in her lifestyle, or that he's drawing your attention to her sexuality. But regardless, you are without a doubt confronted by Olympia's sexuality. There's no way to look at her and not think about sex. Her body language gives the illusion that you're in the room with her. There's a sense of space in that room for you. Manet was showing the harsh reality and corruption of Paris at this time in this painting, as well as being honest about the construction of the painting itself. He was rebellious to academic art and was not afraid to treat his painting like a painting, despite the many criticisms he got for this. Moving on to Les Demoiselles d'Armagnac, created by the famous Spanish painter Picasso. This was painted in 1907, And the style of this piece is Cubism. It's abstract and looks like shattered glass. The title refers to a street in Barcelona, and the location is a brothel. The painting is controversial simply because of the subject matter. Cubism is an abstract type of art. It was developed and highly influenced by Picasso. Picasso was at the forefront of Cubism. It revolutionized the European style of art during the 20th century. The picture depicts 5 women who work in this brothel. Their bodies are distorted and broken and fractured, and they're displayed in geometrical shapes. There's a lot of tension and danger in the way these women are created. The picture expresses trueness and it's raw and ugly. Picasso uses no linear perspective here in this painting. Linear perspective aids in creating an illusion of depth on a flat surface, yet there is some space in this painting. He uses no light or shadowing to create contrast, yet there is a three-dimensional illusion here. Some of the women were looking at directly while others were looking down upon. The women have their gazes towards the viewer. The women seem so close to the viewer. The women on the left are wearing African masks, which is interesting. Africa was known to be what of a mystery to Picasso, and he wanted to study this culture because it was so foreign and intimidating and a bit scary to him. Picasso deserted all form of representation of traditional art known of his time. He was seeking a new visual language and expressed his many emotions in this painting. He's reminding us that the pleasures of life are short. For the compare and contrast portion of my art gallery, I chose Manet's Olympia and Picasso Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Now, I struggle to find many similarities outside the obvious between these two paintings. Both paintings were controversial, no doubt, and simply because of their subject matter, they caused a lot of conversation. They are both depicting prostitutes and humanizing prostitution, and there's no denying that these paintings are about sex. Both paintings show naked women and allude you to the idea of sex. The women in both paintings are looking out at the audience, making the viewer feel like they're there in the painting. Both artists were able to create that illusion. And both depict the harsh reality of this time, or of the time that they're painted. Olympia's style is realism, though. She is a real woman, and she seems to have a sensuality about her. Yes, she's flawed, yet bold. Her face is asymmetrical. She's not traditionally beautiful. Manet chose to emphasize very little of her body. Her breasts and abdomen and legs are not modeled greatly, but he emphasized her hands a lot. He uses implied shapes and simplified forms and uses major contrast in this picture. As you can see, she is very light. The couch that she sits on is very light, contrasting to the wall and the curtains in the background. Manet was not a compositional artist like Picasso. He took ideas from other artists. However, this painting was controversial and pushed boundaries because of its realism and simplicity. He was rebellious against academic art, but he was also representing a very real moment in Paris. Now, Picasso painted women as well, but he painted these women vastly different. The style is Cubism here. The women are shattered and fragmented. The women are positioned in erotic sexual poses. Their eyes are lopsided as they peer out. Their bodies are greatly outlined, and they're raw and ugly and vulgar. You can sense the tension and danger in this painting. Picasso was greatly expressing his fears. This picture is confusing and shattered, and it has no feeling of fluidity like Olympia does. However different or similar you see these two paintings, both are beautiful, boundary pushing, and timeless. Thank you so much for allowing me to take you through my art gallery today. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it.